Today, we're covering breaking news about two significant vulnerabilities discovered in OpenSSH, a critical security component used across nearly every enterprise environment worldwide. On February 18, 2025, the Qualys Threat Research Unit disclosed these vulnerabilities that could allow attackers to perform man-in-the-middle attacks and denial-of-service attacks under certain conditions. Let's break down what IT professionals and security teams need to know about these vulnerabilities and their potential impact, and remediation steps. I'm João Correia, and this is Cybersecurity News with TechScare. The first vulnerability, tracked as CVE-2025-26465, affects the OpenSSH client when the Verify Host Key DNS option is enabled. This logic error allows for an active machine-in-the-middle attack against the client. The second vulnerability, CVE-2025-26466, affects both the OpenSSH client and server, enabling a pre-authentication denial-of-service attack through asymmetric resource consumption. What makes these vulnerabilities particularly concerning is their widespread potential impact, given OpenSSH's ubiquitous presence across enterprise environments. Let's examine CVE-2025-26465 more closely. This vulnerability was introduced back in December 2014, just before the release of OpenSSH version 6.8p1. What's interesting about this vulnerability is that it succeeds regardless of whether the Verify Host Key DNS option is set to Yes or Ask. However, the default setting is No, which means that most standard configurations are not vulnerable. FreeBSD users need to pay special attention. The Verify Host Key DNS option was enabled by default on FreeBSD from September 2013 until March 2023, creating an early 10-year window of vulnerability for these systems. The technical mechanism here involves the OpenSSH client improperly handling SSH/FP DNS records. When an attacker performs a man-in-the-middle attack, they can manipulate this process, causing the client to accept the attacker's key instead of the legitimate server's key. This breaks the integrity of the SSH connection, potentially allowing interception or tampering with the session without the user being aware of the compromise. Moving to the second vulnerability, this one was introduced much more recently, in August 2023, shortly before the release of OpenSSH version 9.5p1. This vulnerability enables a pre-authentication denial-of-service attack, affecting both memory and CPU resources. On the server side, this attack can be particularly disruptive. The attack exploits how OpenSSH handles certain authentication processes before a user is fully authenticated, allowing malicious actors to consume disproportionate resources with minimal effort. The potential impact of these vulnerabilities shouldn't be underestimated. For the first one, a successful man-in-the-middle attack could have severe consequences. SSH sessions are commonly used to access critical infrastructure, database servers, and other sensitive systems. If compromised, attackers could intercept administrative credentials, access sensitive data, move laterally through network infrastructure, and exfiltrate valuable information, like database credentials. These breaches could lead to reputational damage, compliance violations for regulation like GDPR, HIPAA, and PCI DSS, and potentially significant operational disruption. For the second vulnerability, the denial-of-service one, the impact focuses on availability. SSH is a critical service for remote system administration, especially in today's distributed work environments. If attackers can repeatedly exploit this flaw, they could cause prolonged outages or effectively prevent legitimate administrators from managing servers. In an enterprise environment, this could mean critical servers become unreachable, interrupting operations and essential maintenance. It's important for security teams to identify affected systems quickly. For the first vulnerability, the man-in-the-middle vulnerability, OpenSSH versions from 6.8p1 through 9.9p1 are vulnerable. And for the second vulnerability, the denial-of-service one, versions 9.5 through 9.9 are affected. This version ranges highlights how successfully vulnerabilities can persist in software for years before discovery. The man-in-the-middle vulnerability has existed since December 2014. That's over a decade. The good news is that OpenSSH has released version 9.9p2, which addresses both vulnerabilities. Security teams should prioritize upgrading to OpenSSH 9.9p2 as soon as possible, particularly for internet-facing systems and critical infrastructure. For systems that cannot be immediately upgraded, there are some mitigations available. For the first vulnerability, ensuring that Verify Host Key DNS option is explicitly set to No in your SSH client configuration will prevent exploitation. For the second one, the denial of service vulnerability, OpenSSH system administrators can leverage existing mechanisms like login grace time to limit the time allowed for authentication, max startups, control the number of unauthenticated connections, and per source penalties to limit connection attempts from specific sources. However, these mitigations should only be considered temporary measures until a full upgrade can be performed. It's worth noting the professional response to these vulnerabilities. When Qualys researchers confirmed these issues, they followed responsible disclosure practices, working directly with the OpenSSH team to coordinate the announcement. This kind of coordinated vulnerability disclosure represents the best of the security industry's collaborative approach to protecting critical infrastructure. These OpenSSH vulnerabilities, they remind us of the importance of maintaining up-to-date security software, even for components we take for granted. I recommend security teams take the following actions immediately. First, identify all systems running vulnerable versions of OpenSSH. Second, prioritize upgrades based on exposure and criticality. Third, apply the upgrade to OpenSSH version 9.9p2. Fourth, implement temporary mitigations where immediate upgrades are not possible. And finally, review SSH configuration settings across your environment to ensure they follow the best practices for security. For cybersecurity news with TuxCare, I'm João Correia. Stay secure, and I'll see you next time.